new icon or avatar or whatever. So, good news for all of you. We should have another test. You just got to take that test, right? So we got to talk about that. And let's see, we did this. I do have a map on the religious wars, but I made a mistake on it, and I just realized it. So I'm not going to hand that one out, and I had to recycle some old ones, and so I'll get that to you tomorrow, because we got to have maps, because I love maps. Therefore, you love maps, don't you? Yes, and I don't know what's going to happen in a few weeks. We are going to go back. I don't know if we're going to go keep this schedule or go to 90-minute periods, or I don't know. I'm just looking at the same method. And so I'll give you the map. Talk a little bit about Elizabeth. I did assign 12.4, but also 14.1. And did I give you the list for 14.1? Yeah, I did, because 14.1's on 13. There's 13 and 14, so you should already have that one. And I am going to probably set 14.2. I don't worry about that right now. And so I just got to the Battle of Lepanto. I was trying to say Elizabeth, and did we get to Lepanto? Yeah. And Don Juan, who was actually the illegitimate half-brother of King Philip II. Those kind of things happen a lot for monarchies. And yeah, just an incredible battle with the Holy League over Don Juan. So this one we had talked about Council of Trent, the Counter-Reformation, and the effort by the Catholic Church to try to bring the church back, or to bring people back into the fold, but also to be very evangelical. And the index of forbidden books, talked about the Jesuits, mentioned the missions, the Inquisition, what a show. Oh, and Baroque art. Which, by the way, that is pretty spectacular. And this one, I told you, this is 7 stories high. It's so amazing when you're up here, looking down, it looks tiny. It's really a weird thing. That church is so big. This cathedral, it has markers on it where it'll say, you know, this is where St. Paul's Cathedral and England would fit inside. So you're walking up, oh, it's so big. And even though Italy's very hot, and so a lot of the touristy types wear shorts, men cannot wear shorts in there, and women cannot have bare shoulders. That's in a lot of places in Italy like that. Of course, Italy, no one wears shorts. That's not fashionable. So it could be 1,000 degrees and they don't wear shorts. Good case here. So I think we got Rubens, got Queen Elizabeth, weird. Oh, and that's the holy, or that's Jesus and Mary looking down on the great victory of Lepanto. So let's get right to it. The 80-year war. This is also part of it. This directly gets back to Elizabeth. It's called the Dutch Revolt. And what this was is in the Netherlands, certain areas here are sometimes called the United Provinces. They begin to break away. And part of the reason was the majority of this area, and it's right about here. You see this called the province of Holland, too, right there. They were the Dutch Reformed Church. That means they were Calvinists. And remember, Philip II saw them as not only heathens and heretics, but it's his duty to bring them back into the Catholic Church, or they'll be sentenced to hell. And so, the most important city in this, and the city they'll fight over time after time, and there'll be so many battles on this. And this map I put in there, and yeah, it doesn't really show where Antwerp is very well, but Antwerp is right there, and it's one of the biggest harbors in the world. It's still one of the biggest port cities in the world. And it goes through this kind of swampy marshland here, but Antwerp would be the most important city. Now, it's a huge harbor city in Belgium, And so much of the fighting would be around Antwerp and dealing with Antwerp and fighting there. And the reason it's here is these areas here were the centers of the Dutch Revolt. And they're the ones who converted to Calvinism. These areas remain relatively Catholic. And it's like that today. So the Netherlands is here, and this part of Belgium, they're also called Flemish. They speak Dutch, but they're mostly Catholic. So, and I know you want to see a picture of Antwerp, and so I just thought this was great with the sea monsters. But Margaret of Parma was, she was Philip's sister, and she was essentially the Duchess of Parma, which she ran the Netherlands. And she was petitioned by a number of Calvinists who were worried that Philip would try to brutally repress them. There's the middle of this war. We're not going to go into all the details of the war. But while this was going on, and these Calvinist Dutch noblemen were called Giezen. And so the Giezen came to petition her, basically saying, we will remain part of Spain. Just let us be Calvin. Well, members, we're not really sure if it was Margaret or most probably her advisors. They referred to these Dutch as beggars. And beggars as with their hand out, kind of unruly, as inferiors. And this absolutely infuriated the Dutch noblemen, who realized we're never going to get a fair shake. And so they began to organize a much bigger defense of their Dutch provinces, called the United Provinces. And they were going to take this term beggars, and they'll kind of hold on to it. We're beggars, right? Okay. And so with that, this will trigger something that had happened in Geneva, and it happened in other places. It's called iconoclasm. Iconoclasm. I can't even say it. Iconoclasm. Iconoclasm. But they went into all of these Catholic churches, and what they're doing is basically destroying the religious idols and models. They stripped down tapestry. They removed religious idols, religious statues, destroyed them, broke them apart, and ripped the gold out and kept it. Basically, this is a Calvinist idea that we're worshiping idols and not true faith. Remember Calvin, they're supposed to be like the blessed, the elect who are going to heaven. And this is a picture of them ripping down, you see that's the Pope. And they just tore it apart. Well, this, to Philip II. All right, this proves that they're heretics and we must destroy them once and for all. The problem Philip is going to have in this revolt is this area in the Netherlands, much of it's below sea level. In fact, a lot of the area that's in the Netherlands today have been, it's called reclaimed. But basically, they use dams and canals to travel or to move some of the water to basically leave areas that are below sea level, but relatively dry, kind of marshy land. It's actually decent for agriculture, but it's really interesting. You go to the Netherlands, and all it smells kind of like swamp. It's much of it's below sea level. And so that's why it'll be infamous for having a series of dikes that will protect much of this land. They now have an amazing system of dikes built because of climate change and water rising. And a lot of people are starting to look at that because it might be too late for places like Miami, but it's probably going to have to be done for Miami. Well, that would be it. The Duke of Alva, who's already there, he would become known as the Iron Duke. And he's going to put down, once and for all, the iconoclastic protest. He will destroy this revolt of the Calvinists. And they set up this organization called the Councils of Trouble, or sometimes it'll also be called the Councils of Blood. And their goal was to root out the leaders of the Calvinists and kill them. And once again, see the map. It's very close to England. And the Iron Duke would be infamous for his brutality. Eventually, he'd replace Margaret of Parma and become the Duke of Parma. Too. The Duke of Alba, Duke of Parma in time. And they marched a huge army that was down here fighting in Italy. It's called the Spanish Road. But they marched through the Holy Roman Empire and arrived up here in Spanish Netherlands. And there's still marks of this road. There's areas that are now part, like across Germany, like part of the Autobahn. But it's the infamous Spanish Road. It also shows the determination of Philip to march an army over the Alps to destroy Spanish Netherlands. This showed his determination. And this would lead to a brutal conflict. And that's, basically, Alba would put this down by 1570. They put a huge tax on it. But the United Provinces, the Dutch, survived. I'm going through this very quickly. But, you see that picture right there? That's an example of iconoclastic activity. See what they did? They took a hammer and beat the faces of the various, well, this is supposed to be Mary. They just ripped the faces off. Well, beginning after this, one of the more famous leaders of the Netherlands, William I, is also called the Silent, and the color of his house was orange. That is why today, the color of the Netherlands, even though the Dutch flag is red, white, and blue, it's orange. And he was not, think about it as the leader amongst noblemen. It's called the stadtholder. So the leader amongst equal noblemen. It's not quite a king, but when the Netherlands would get a monarch, it would be the stadtholder. And basically the leader of a state. And they attacked the Spanish again in 1572. And part of the reason why, in France, French Calvinists were butchered by the French Calvinists called Huguenots, were butchered in what's called the St. Bartholomew's Massacre. 20,000 were killed. And that's when William the Orange said, I have no choice. I got to fight back, or it's going to happen here. And this would be a new stage of this war. And so the Dutch colors are red, white, and blue. They're flag. But you go there and everything about the Dutch is orange. And so, for example, if you see their national football, soccer team, they're in orange, even though that's not on their flag. And when I was in Berlin, because my in-laws, my wife's sister, her husband, my one nephew lives there. And we were there, it must have been 2005, the World Cup was over, which you have no idea what fans are to the World Cup. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's unreal. It's unreal. We just happened to go there. I just happened to be there. It was pretty amazing. But I went out alone in Berlin. I had to go to a couple of shops. I was downtown. You'd find these mobs of like Slovakian fans. You know, it was just crazy. And we're talking millions. I've never seen like it in my life. And which not the best time to go visit. But I was walking out of this little shop, and it's on the Untitled Chapter, and the main street in Berlin. I'm walking out, and there's all, you know, these mobs of fans just taking over the street, singing, and all these Dutch fans. They're all wearing orange, you know. I didn't think about it, and they came out, and they grabbed me. Like, come on! And I'm like walking with them, and I'm like, what the heck? I didn't realize it. I just grabbed, you know, a plain T-shirt. It was orange. I had this orange T-shirt. I didn't know. I wasn't even thinking it. And they're like, oh! And the guys start talking, and they just know, you're an American. And I said, yeah. They speak incredible English. Better English than American. But they said, oh, it's so great that you're a Dutch soccer fan. And I'm like, yes, I am! So about 3 blocks, I became a major Dutch soccer fan. That was so nice. But in 1573, Alba would besiege the important Dutch city of Leyden, the important Dutch city, and the Dutch held out. Partially with British support, but they held out. And this would be a huge victory. By holding out, the Dutch could begin to reform their army. William I began using some of the new tactics that would become developed during the 30 Years' War. And Dutch pirates began to have huge effect. Also other Dutch things they would do. So the Guzen, the sea beggars, by the way, look how they spelled it. Yeah, sea beggars with they had an A. They went to England. And they were using that as a base. Now, Elizabeth kicked them out at first because Elizabeth was trying to play kind of a double game. But these were pirates. These were pirates. And they went back to the Netherlands. And then in 1572, Elizabeth later supported the sea beggars, realizing, wait a minute, I can get back at Spain. And we can start chipping away at Spain. Dutch and British pirates can begin to stop their galleys and take back chip away at Spain. So here is a Dutch ship attacking a Spanish ship. And Elizabeth started sending money and troops. And Philip ran out of money. In fact, in 1573, sea beggars, actually it was and pirates, stopped a fleet of 16 Spanish galleys off the coast of Cuba and got enough gold to support the Dutch effort for 12 years on just one convoy of ships. And Philip was expecting this money and literally overnight didn't have the money to pay back his mercenaries. And this would be in many ways the beginning of the end for them. What would the mercenaries do? Do you remember when his dad couldn't pay off the mercenaries and they sacked Rome? Oh, we're jumping right here. They call it the Spanish Fury. They conquered Antwerp once and for all from the Dutch, but destroyed it. Burnt much of the city down, sacked and looted it. And here is a very stylized picture of the bodies of the Dutch. Here being tortured, just destroyed this city. Some burnt alive. But partially because they weren't getting paid. Now, but here's the big thing. Elizabeth kept trying to help the Dutch. And so here she is feeding the Dutch cow. That's Philip. But there's William of Orange in control. Okay, it's a very weird painting. Not really sure. But she kept helping the Dutch, chipping away at Spanish influence. And this is going to lead to, two more things then. We're coming up to this. William was assassinated by a Catholic, 1584. And you might think this would help the Spanish. This actually strengthened the Dutch because now they're like, okay, now we have no choice. He would be replaced with, be the right guy, Maurice of Nassau, the Prince of Orange. And now he organized Dutch resistance. He rebuilt the army and arguably would make the Dutch army to one of the most powerful, yet small, in that region. New tactics, and they went fortress by fortress and began to drive the Spanish out. Last couple of things for the Dutch. The Prince of Orange, and he's with orange hair. And in 1590, because the Spanish were broke, they created what would eventually be called officially the United Provinces of the Netherlands. And it's that area in red. And they would spend the next 50 years trying to conquer most of this area here. And don't worry about Henry IV. But the big thing is Spain was broke, and the Dutch basically won independence. But you also notice one thing too. That's 1590. Part of the reason Spain was broke is they're fighting a war with Britain, partially triggered by the Netherlands. So they got basically independence. Don't worry about Henry IV. That's Henry IV of France, and we're not there yet. So with that, 1598, Philip dies. Philip III takes the throne. Can you see the chin? Can you see the Habsburg chin? Pretty big chin. He has got the big ruffles there to hide it. We should all wear those. And Philip III just wants out of this thing. Basically, it's how can we just let him go and save face? Oh, we're jumping right there. In 1609, there'd be a 12-year truce. You like the picture? The Dutch started using fire ships. And in fire ships, they would pack the ship with black powder. And then they would set fire to them and have the ship go into the Spanish fleet. And the problem with these sailing vessels are, you can't just immediately turn on the engine. It doesn't work that way. So if the ships aren't moving, you're in real trouble. So if they can time this right, they set the ship on fire and the black powder goes off, this could cause horrendous damage. And look at the show, be very graphically of the people and various things flying up because of this. So that, and in 1648, it's called the Peace of Munster. The Netherlands would win their independence. And a lot of people include this as part of the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War. But this basically gives the Dutch their independence. So I had to kind of go through the Dutch really quick because it relates directly to the British. So Elizabeth was helping, trying to chip away at the Spanish. So let's get to that. By the way, I love this picture by Rembrandt of the Peace of Munster. So the Dutch will become independent. So let's get back to England. We already, just to remind you, remember Bloody Mary? That was Catherine's daughter, Catherine of Aragon's daughter. She had 287 people killed for heresy. There she was married to Philip II. Then we have Elizabeth who took the crown. So this is where we finished with Britain. So I want to show you some pictures of Elizabeth because these are amazing. She had her hair is, I guess, not quite as red. It was more kind of a strawberry blonde. And, but you really see it shown in the pictures of her. And so that's her when she took power in 1560. And these paintings are going to become part of her propaganda. You're showing her very regal. She was very vain and so thought of herself as the model of beauty. The white, that would be a white makeup, lead-based. They would just pat this stuff on. They actually had an idea that lead might not be good for you, but hey, you got to look good, right? I mean, right? So that's one of the more famous pictures. Did you get the point here? That was part of her propaganda, all these pictures. You go to the Portrait Museum in London, and there's just a lot. It just goes on forever of Elizabeth paintings. Hey, monarchs always do this. But so much of her image was very intelligent, could speak multiple languages. She could go speak to normal sailors on board ships and also speak to noble. And she had this amazing gift. This is my favorite one of her from 1580, playing a lute. That seems a little more like natural. Wow. Getting near the end. You see the point here? I love all the painting. 1592. And that's right near the end. And they started making her look much younger than what she actually was. That's probably pretty close to what she looked like right at the end. So, only reason we put down Sir Robert Dudley is she never married. She strung Philip II on for a decade. Kind of, yeah, do you want to marry? Because remember, Philip was married to Bloody Mary. Sir Robert Dudley was probably the closest thing she had to, she called him her favorites. She never married, but it would be the closest to a lover. But she always kept it separate. She was going to maintain her independence. So she didn't marry Philip. She was married to the state, thus the Virgin Queen. Yes?
Did people care that she was a woman, or was that not really a huge deal?
It was a really big deal. And that was part of the reason she didn't want to get married.
Because then he would take over.
Yeah, he would take over, and then she could do that. I'm above the normal emotional activities of people. I'm the Virgin Queen. I'm married to the state. Yeah. And therefore, I'm more pure than anybody else. Now, she was a regular person like anybody else, but And Philip kept trying to get her, Philip II of Spain, 10 years. Dudley, we'll come back to Dudley. But in 1559, by the way, that's my favorite picture of Elizabeth. It just looks like an ermine. In 1559, the Act of Supremacy guaranteed that she would be queen. Because remember, technically she was illegitimate because of Anne Boleyn. But she remained unmarried with this. That would make her queen. But she had a horrific temper. And we mentioned favorites, never married. 1570, she would be excommunicated from the church. She would finally be excommunicated because she was obviously Protestant. And this maintained the Protestant faith. She was also indecisive. I think that has something to do with some people who are very thoughtful will think about 45,000 different possibilities before they make a decision. And sometimes it's difficult to actually make a decision. And also, if you're the monarch in a precarious situation on the edge of civil war and a big country like Spain wants to kill you, you might be worried about my decision might end my life. So you're going to be a little more careful. But in the north, we got to very quickly get to another story of another person that we all relate. Mary, Queen of Scots. So Mary, Queen of Scots, Catholic, monarch. Just one sec. That is bad feeling. And the saga of her will become intertwined with Philip, the Netherlands, and the Armada. So, Mary, Queen of Scots. Her parents, relatives of Elizabeth, they're all related. James V of Scotland. And he married, it's Mary of Guise. And Guise is going to have an important, a very influential Catholic family, Catholic house from France. And they're both Catholic, but this was just at a time when Calvinism was sweeping across Scotland. And Britain had a vested interest. Well, after James V died, Mary became queen. But we'll get to all the things that happened with Mary. Mary, when she was 17 years old, married Francis II of France. This was arranged by the Guise family. Francis II was the 15-year-old brand new monarch of France. And all the pictures of him look like he's about 12. But they were both very young and very isolated. Francis II was ill his whole life and would die of an ear infection a year after he became king. So Mary is now single. But she vowed to have to get married, stay Catholic, keep Scotland Catholic, and have an heir. So she's a lot different than Elizabeth. So when she became queen, here she is, and she was considered just beautiful for the time. This auburn hair that people would talk about. Elizabeth was incredibly jealous of her. And she would always ask what Mary looked like and things like that. And was like, I don't want to say anything about this. My favorite story about that is she asked about Mary and said, well, how tall is he? Or how tall is she? And a courtesan said, very reluctantly, she's taller than you. And Elizabeth said, well, she's the wrong height because I'm the perfect height. And I just thought that was really fun. But the problem was, she's Catholic as the country is becoming Calvinist. And so this religious fight will lead to a series of intrigues because John Knox was leading the Calvinist Protestants. And there is a picture, that's a picture I took of Knox outside in Edinburgh. Knox was in Geneva, trained there, former Catholic priest, but absolutely determined to not allow the Catholics to come in and take over. And so, as he saw it, Mary was a massive threat. And he was aided by Britain. So, remember Lord Darnley? Whoops. Mary, Queen of Scots, married Lord Darnley. Darnley was Catholic, a royal household, and he was considered like the most, what they would say about him, the most beautiful man in Scotland. He was considered charming, exactly what everybody or every man wanted to be. Here's a picture of Darnley and Mary. So this beautiful couple, as it turned out, Darnley was kind of a dolt. And not at all capable of keeping her in power against the Calvinist rule. And so she began to intrigue with a guy by the name of David Rizzio. And almost certainly had an affair with Rizzio. And Darnley was incredibly jealous and dumb. And so, Darnley sent people in to Mary's chamber. She's queen. And she was pregnant. Into her bedchambers and stabbed Rizzo 56 times. Here's a picture of Mary trying to stop them as they just ripped him apart. And she was pregnant and had to flee. But that son, I know, it's creepy as creepy could be, would become James the Sixth or James the First. And, by the way, isn't this picture horrible? Mary doesn't look all that good. And poor James just looked, I mean, talk about the adult babies here. And to make sure it's not a Catholic monarch, not only did she have to immediately abdicate the throne, she had to give it to James when he was a little bit over 1 year old. And I don't know about you, but at one, I would not have been a great monarch. They had a regent that took power, and Mary would spend the rest of her life trying to get back on the throne. By the way, have you ever heard? And so there's going to be Catholics who will try to kill James, and Calvinists, because the worry is James might actually turn out to be a Catholic. As it turns out, he was a very devout Calvinist. But have you ever heard of Rockabye Baby on the Treetop when the ball breaks? That was about him and all the assassination attempts. Or the chance of assassination, Rockabye Baby. So, Calvinists decided they got to get rid of Darnley, who killed Rizzio. And by the way, they blamed Mary for this. And so Darnley was next. And what they did is they snuck in barrels of gunpowder into Darnley's home. This is supposed to be the picture of Darnley's home. He heard it in his basement, climbed out his window and ran away, but didn't make it. They grabbed him anyways, butchered him, and then blew up his house anyways. And so Darnley, Rizzio, and so Mary's caught with this, and she takes off on the run. Yeah, this is supposed to be a very, almost like a map-like picture. Oh, almost forgot. So, she hooked up with another guy. She's always looking for somebody who can help her get her back on the throne. Lord Bothwell. And there's Bothwell right there. Bothwell, see, this is my chance to become King of Scotland. And so what they do is, he divorces his wife and tries to start a rebellion. It fails miserably, and they flee to England. So Mary's on the run. She arrives in England, and what does Elizabeth do with her? What does Elizabeth? Elizabeth doesn't want this. Elizabeth doesn't want her for two reasons. First off, three reasons. Elizabeth doesn't want to get involved in the intrigue in Scotland directly. Elizabeth also, they're cousins. She's an heir to the throne. And so she would be spent 18 years in captivity. She's an heir to the throne, and Catholic might bring Philip into this. So she is held in this manner for 18 years. And she would be involved in 2 other attempts to try to get her back to Scotland. And one would try to kill Queen Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth found out about that second one, I'm going to jump ahead. Oh, I should add, she got a plot with Anthony Babington. We need to know Babington, but this is the code they used for the plot to kill Queen Elizabeth. They found with Mary, and this is how they extracted the information. That's a rack. And you pull both ends, and you get taller. It's just a great way to just get a horrific torture. And then we just do one click. Like my click sounds? Pretty good? Feel like you're there? And so Mary, Queen of Scots, would be condemned. So Elizabeth had her killed. This is just at a time where the Dutch are winning their war. Elizabeth is helping, and now she finally got rid of Mary. And here's Mary the execution. And you know the castle. She wore red, which was seen as quite scandalous. But part of the reason is she was going to die for her Catholic faith. And that's what it represented. And here's her being led to it. Here's a drawing of her. You know, so there's the block. And they have the assistant hold her arms down. And then noble men, noble women were beheaded. Commoners were hung. But unbeknownst to anybody else, she wore a wig as her last laugh. Because when it was done, it was really common to pick her head up and show it to the crowd. Well, when the hangman picked her head up, just got the wig and the head stayed. That's really going a long ways for the last laugh. But that's what Mary did. And with that, here's another picture of the execution. There's James. While that's going on, England is increasing their fight against the Dutch. Or sorry, against the Spanish. Privateers are pirates for hire. You know what a pirate is? You know what a privateer is? Basically, they get a contract from the crown. Basically, they go out and they say, you're working for the English government, but you're a pirate. And you have to give part of your loot to the crown. Now, trust me, the Spanish colony, they'd kill him. And Sir Francis Drake, right here, would become famous as a scourge of Spanish ships in the Caribbean. And the Spanish would eventually have over 100 ships trying to hunt him down. And he would sail all the way around the world to escape. So he's obviously a great seaman too. But you have the privateers, the Dutch, and now Mary. And Philip has had enough. And Philip decides to invade England in what's going to become known as the Spanish Armada. There's so much stuff that happened. It's such an amazing time. But look at that map. So that's a map from Elizabeth's time. That's 1590. It's a pretty good map, isn't it? So you can see England, Scotland is still independent. But James would be because Mary was an heir, after Elizabeth died, it's going to be James. And James the sixth of Scotland would become James the First. And this shows the route of the Spanish Armada. And so I got a little bit to finish tomorrow about the Armada, talk about a few more religious wars. Let me use the map. This stuff fascinates me. So the gunpowder plot will actually be against James I, and we'll get to that, Guy Fawkes, because that's another great story. Someone asked about the gunpowder plot, and Guy Fawkes trying to blow up Parliament. The thing is, gunpowder is not an explosive; it just ignites, and the gases push out the cells. So you need a lot of gunpowder. It's really hard to use gunpowder if you're going to blow a building. Write that down. Next time you want to Blow up Parliament. We're not gonna blow up Parliament, we're filming this. So I'll get the map up, I'll give it to you tomorrow, sound good?
Partridge.
And I like your,